Well, there we go, Lawrence, the last launch of this 2021 launch season, and it's the car that everybody wanted to see, the Ferrari SF21.
Every year, I think with Ferrari, that's all fans really want to see, what they can come up with each year. And often the livery tends to stay the same, and it's what's underneath that changes. But this year, Will, they've changed it up, haven't they?
They've changed a lot, an awful lot, actually, and the car looking visibly different. And if they've done that much work, from what we can see, there's also an awful lot of intrigue over what we can't see. Let's start, though, with the difficult foundation from which they've had to develop this car, which was a pretty painful 2020. Lawrence, 2020 was, and there's no beating around the bush here, no easy way to say it, Ferrari's worst season in 40 years.
Yeah, it hurt, and you could see the hurt on their faces almost as soon as pre-season testing started, actually, because they realised by that point that the data that they'd seen on the dynos was actually correct, and both the power unit and the car and the chassis and the aero wasn't going to perform as they'd anticipated, and they knew it was going to be a tough year, and that's what it turned out to be. Charles got a couple of podiums early in the year, but really he was fortunate and outdrove the car and kind of used talent more than the car's ability. And then it was just a bit of a slog for the rest of the season.
Yeah, factor into that, of course, the quickly dissolving relationship between Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel as well, and it all sort of created a very difficult, I think, environment for everybody at the team. Of course, the team held back, as we know, by the technical directive at the end of 2019, the secretive deal that was done between Ferrari and the FIA. They had that power unit advantage through the end of 2019 and expected to be able to make good on that last season. So chucked a whole load more downforce on the car, and what they got left with was an underpowered power unit and a car with way too much downforce and way too much drag. It was the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, I remember Sebastian Vettel using the word draggy, and he was just saying the car is just too draggy. And it was, I think, disappointing that the power unit went from that class leader in 2019 to the bottom of the pack and off by some way. You really saw the pain that they suffered as a works team, but also for their customers who suffered even more. So like you said, it was a double whammy, really, a combination of factors that really hurt them.
Lawrence, does it make it easier for Ferrari that they're coming from such a disappointing season that this year can't possibly be worse? Or does it make it harder given that there's so much carryover between the two seasons?
I think if it's a bit of both, I think the pressure is definitely off them, and that's what they need at Maranello, the pressure to be off their shoulders, because last year was so difficult. But with so much carryover, and Mattia mentioned this in the launch earlier today, that you are limited in terms of the step forward that you can make because of all of that carryover. So I think that this year, just moving forward would be a good step for them. And I think that will hopefully help them take that pressure off and deliver results from the off, really.
Well, let's look at that in a little bit more detail later. For now, though, let's look at what has changed going into 2021. Well, Lawrence, the driver lineup obviously was the big one. They had that confirmed before they even turned a wheel at the first race in Austria last year.
Ruthlessly efficient. Yep, they had their lineup in the bag with Carlos Sainz joining the team, and in a lineup that they've got with Charles Leclerc, who's their future, signed, of course, their longest ever contract that they've ever handed out. They've got a really youthful, futuristic almost lineup for the team, and I suppose that's one positive to take out of the struggles that Ferrari have had of late, is that they really got their future foundations in place if they deliver. I think Charles had a great season last year, and so did Carlos. So if Carlos can kind of get his feet under the table quickly, Charles continues to kick on like he did last year, and I arguably think he's had a better year than his first year with Ferrari. There's no reason why those drivers can't help take that team forward.
No, absolutely. You talked earlier about the pressure being off the team. That pressure very much is off the team in 2021. Mattia Binotto seemingly has the faith, crucially, of Ferrari's chairman, who said at the end of last year and into this year that it was a long-term project. So they're not aiming for that immediate return to the top that has almost sort of held back Ferrari over many years, that need to perform every year. They're looking at this as a long-term project now.
Yeah, and I think for the Tifosi, their loyal following, I think that's a good thing, because I think that if they had piled that pressure back on, there was a danger that they'd just fall into this rhythm of struggling again. This year's kind of a holding year. We've heard this word transition used a lot before the new regulations come in next year. So Ferrari can use this sensibly, really focus on, say, the power unit, making sure that that's great for 2022, kind of solve all the little details and the problems that they had with this car, that they can really hit the ground running with their brand new car next year, it could be a really good thing for them. For John Elkann to say that, I think does take a lot of pressure off Mattia, which is great, because I think that he is a good manager. I think he's great for that team. And what you don't want to see is them falling back into that position of getting rid of staff and a high turnover, because we've seen in the past that just doesn't work. This could be what they need to become a world championship winning team again.
That is, of course, the end goal. Let's look then at what we learned from today's launch. Well, Lawrence, let's look at the technical aspects of the car first and foremost, because while we didn't see everything, as is the way with all of the launches, we did see an awful lot, and we did hear an awful lot about where they've spent their tokens and where they've focused. And the focus has been pretty much on the entire car.
Yeah, it was intrigued to hear Mattia saying that they've kind of tried to attack all aspects of the car, obviously within the regulations and within the carryover rules. And it's interesting that they focus their token spend and they're developing the rear of the car, going for the new suspension and the new transmission. Like you said, well, lots of really nice detailing across the car, even down to the front wing and the nose. It's a good looking car. And we often say that a good looking car is fast, but we also know inherently that car has weaknesses, and it's whether they've been able to iron out those weaknesses with all these little changes for this year.
Yeah, it still has a comparatively fat nose compared to some of the cars that might be attempting to rival for those upper midfield places. Of course, having spent their tokens on the rear of the car, can't do much about that front end. But as you say, slightly different nose, very different front wing. The engine as well, the power unit. Big changes going on there. That the team very confident that this will claw back the disadvantage they had in 2020.
They've made a lot of noise about the engine, starting from very late last year into this year, and it's been consistent. And that can only suggest, to me at least, that the dyno numbers are proving exciting or meeting expectations, because they've been here before by setting their standards high and then not delivering at testing. They needed to overhaul that engine, not least because not just for this season, but with the engine freeze coming in 2022, they can't afford to have an engine that then is below par, but they're stuck with essentially for several seasons after that. So as you say, massive gains they're hoping to come from the engine. Gunther Steiner was talking earlier this week around the time of his launch, and he was saying that he's heard that's a good step as well. So it's encouraging that, from all parties, everyone who's going to be using that Ferrari power unit, there's positivity coming out of it.
We have to talk about the livery very quickly. Of course, everyone getting excited this year that one of the teams was going to be green in Aston Martin. Don't think anyone was expecting there to be green on a Ferrari. It jars for me. I've got to say, it doesn't work. It's very strange, and apparently a last-minute decision for them to turn it green on the side of the car. We talk, of course, about the Mission Winnow logo, controversial since it first appeared on the car back in 2018. Only appeared at some races in 2019, none in 2020. We understand will only appear at some races in 2021. For me, in that shade of green on that beautiful red, the fewer the better.
It's certainly going to take some getting used to, I think. Already, to be fair, in the time that we've had a look at the images, it's growing on me. I think I'm more interested. Oh no, Will, you completely disagree. I'm more interested in that transition from their traditional red to then harking back to that burgundy colour of the original Ferrari. I think it's quite nice that they've had a little nod to their history there, because Ferrari, of course, Formula One's most famous team, and they've been here the longest. I like that aspect. You're right though, that green it's quite green, isn't it?
Yeah, I like the nod to the history, the sort of almost the numbers that they've been painted onto the car as well. There's a nice little sort of nod to the past. I really like that. I don't know, luminescent green on a beautiful scarlet Ferrari, not for me, mate, sorry. Absolutely not for me. Anyway, let's look at what would create a good or a bad season for the team and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. So, Lawrence, the good and the bad for Ferrari in 2021.
So I think strengths are their lineup. They're getting Carlos Sainz, who's going to be keen to hit the ground running and show Charles Leclerc that he's not going to be a number 2 driver. So I think that will not only bring out the best in him, but it will hopefully bring out the best in Charles as well, who hopefully kick on for them. And we've seen from both those drivers, they have the capability to get more out of the car than an ordinary driver could do. So I think that bodes really well for Ferrari. If their chatter about the engine comes through, I think that bodes well, because that'll be an instant step up for them. You could really see how much it hurt them last year. Charles and Sebastian often sitting ducks on the straight. So I think those are strengths. I think the weaknesses are that they're stuck with what they've got essentially from last year to this year, and they can only make little changes on the aero and the chassis side. So I think that might limit the step that they're able to take.
Does that, though, also work as a positive for them if they know they're coming from such a difficult basis, a difficult foundation, realizing they can't perhaps make giant strides? Does that serve to limit their expectations and therefore act as an additional positive?
I think so. I think that at this moment in time, Ferrari have got to use all the positives that they can take, or turn negatives into positives. I think that when they look at this campaign, without that pressure, and we've spoken already about, that pressure hanging on their shoulders, hopefully it will give them the freedom to be expressive and really go for it this year. And then if it doesn't work out, well, it doesn't work out. But what more have they lost? So you're right. If they can turn that into a positive, I think that will probably stand them in a really good stead. And we'll see whether they can deliver on that over the course of the season.
On then to what I think is going to be one of the most interesting questions of any of these that we've made so far in this pre-season, which is, what would a good year or a bad year look like for Ferrari? Right, Lawrence, what do you think a good year looks like for Ferrari this year?
I think a good year looks like P3. I think that they beat Aston Martin, McLaren and Alpine. And accept that, Mercedes and Red Bull are a step too far this year. I think that would be a good year. You could arguably even say it'd be a great, fantastic year for them, because it's going to be a huge challenge. What about you, Will? What do you think?
I don't think the championship position even matters. I think a good year for them will be an acknowledgement that the power unit has made gains in the areas that they hoped it would, therefore getting on top of where they lacked last year. Also that they've been able to, in the small areas they have been able to change, get on top of the aerodynamic woes that they had last year. I think this year is all about ensuring that the changes they've made and what they're seeing back in Maranello, they also see on track. If we look at this as a year very much of rebuilding, I don't think they can lose. Even if they finish behind Aston Martin, even if they finish behind McLaren, it still gives them that increased time in the wind tunnel for 2023, which in and of itself is a positive. If the Italian public, the adoring Tifosi and the Italian press can back off the throttle and get off their back this year, I don't see how this year can be anything but positive for them, should they see the steps forward that they hope.
Yes, but I think that there is a limit to that. And if they end up 7th, 8th, worst case scenario behind an Alfa Romeo and a Haas who are customers, that's probably something that the Tifosi, that's probably a step too far. But I agree that if they can make those kind of steps forward in pure performance, you're right. I think that would be constitute a good year.
So what does a bad year look like for Ferrari? Just finishing behind Alfa Romeo and Haas, or does it include finishing behind the likes of AlphaTauri and Alpine?
Yeah, I think a bad year is 6th or worse, to be honest. I think that they'll want to see some sort of progress visually on the scoreboard. It might be, that they are on the podium a bit more often, say, and they have a lot of peaks during the year, and then they have some tougher weekends, and then therefore don't finish highly in the Constructors' Championship. That would still be a better year. I think what they don't want is to take another step back from last year and the results that they make.
Yeah, I'd argue 6th in the Constructors' Championship, even if they don't hit the podium as often as they did last year through, the stellar performances of Charles Leclerc, would still be seen as a positive for them if the power unit has taken a step forward, if the aero has been shown to take a step forward, if everything that they're putting in place works as they hope it is going to work, that in and of itself has got to be a good thing.
Definitely, although it is going to heat the pressure on them for 2022, because you are almost moving the eggs into that basket, aren't you?
This is it. Yeah, this is it. The only way that this year is good for them by finishing back in sixth and accepting that they might not be as competitive as they hoped, is if it creates and shores up that foundation, not just to take podiums and wins in 2022, but to win the World Championship in 2022, straight out with the new regs.
For them, I think for 22, there can be no other goal. They need to use this regulation change and use this year to make that happen. And I think anything less than that will be a disappointment.
Brilliant stuff, mate. Well, we get to see the car at the track tomorrow. Of course, testing starts at the end of the week as well. Looking forward to getting there. It's going to be great to finally see the cars in the flesh.
Oh, I can't wait. Just getting here to Bahrain, knowing that we're so close to seeing cars on track and getting the season underway, and having done all of these review videos and kind of got a little taster for what each team has got. I'm super excited to see what they deliver when they actually hit the track.
And critically, what they've all been hiding.
Yeah, yes. Because, teams like McLaren, who obviously launched very early on, are probably going to look very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Time. Can't wait for it, mate. Thank you so much, as always, for your insight and your input. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. That's it. 10 teams have launched, even though we haven't necessarily seen the 10 final cars which will hit the track at the end of this week. Now, all that is left is to see what they've truly got. We will see you over this weekend from the track in Bahrain for one final time for this preseason, then from Lawrence and from me. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.